This week I'm thinking about one of my patients that I had as a chaplain. She had terrible pain in her head, and this affected her vision, her movement, her balance. She couldn't drive for a while. She felt disoriented all the time, and she felt really sad and confused. And I visited her a lot because she was in the hospital a lot, unfortunately. And there was one visit where a resident had come in when I was visiting, and he looked at her briefly and focused his attention onto her chart. And he summarized her symptoms, saying just what I said to you, but he said that the tests that they had done did not give any conclusive information, so they could not diagnose her, they could not help her, and they suggested that her illness was in her head, literally. And then he left and went to the next room. This is unfortunately a very common experience in a hospital. But for this patient, this was the beginning of a very long journey. It would be months before the patient would receive an accurate diagnosis of a painful and severe neurological disorder. But in that brief encounter, what I was most shocked by was not the lack of diagnosis, but the lack of compassion from that resident. In a few moments, the resident had completely dismissed the patient and all of her symptoms and made her feel really unimportant and probably that she had made a mistake or that she was coming to him with misinformation. All he saw was her file. He did not see this patient as a person. We read in our Torah portion this week, "The priest shall see or examine the affection on the skin of the body. If hair in the affected patch has turned white and the affection appears to be deeper than the skin of the body, it is a leprous affection. When the priest sees the person, he shall pronounce the person impure." The text tells the priest to examine the person, to look at her, and to really identify the illness. In the text that we just read, the verb to see is repeated twice. The first time, the priest sees the affliction. The second time, the priest sees the person. Rabbi Yisrael Joshua Trunk of Kuntno writes, "It seems that there is a hint here that when one checks a person, one must not see only what they lack. In the place of the affliction, rather, one must see them in their entirety, including their elevated qualities. Therefore, the priest will see the affliction, and after that, the priest will see the person. He should see them in all of their entirety. If we see others in their entirety, we will understand that they, like us, are three-dimensional human beings with their own stories, hopes, and dreams. We will see that they, like us, want to be blessed, and we will see that they are not so different from all of us." Tazria, our Torah portion, is about identifying illness. Tazarat, specifically, it's a skin disease that, perhaps ironically, we are not entirely sure how to define. It is usually translated as leprosy. The focus of our Torah portion is diagnosis and quarantine and the eventual reintegration of the sufferer into the Israelite camp. The priest is not a doctor or a healer. His role is to determine the presence or the absence of the disease and the corresponding response. This is a challenging parsha for many reasons, but for this sermon, because of how it tells us to respond to others' sicknesses. The idea of adding to a person's suffering by excluding them from the whole community is very problematic. We can justify this approach by pointing to the sin at the root of the sickness. Generally, the sin is lashon hara, evil speech, or gossip, associated with leprosy because of the episode with Miriam, Aaron, and Moses in Numbers. Doing this helps us find meaning, namely that our actions have consequences. But at what cost? The cost is a limit on our compassion, or rachamim. Exclusion and isolation of others is the opposite of this Jewish value. When someone who is healthy, when perhaps all of us encounter someone who is ill, the first instinct often is to distance ourselves, to remind ourselves of all the differentiating factors between ourselves and the person who is sick. And the subtext there to ourselves is that we're different. We'll be okay. We won't get sick. And when it comes to illness, even as our human defenses motivate us to differentiate ourselves from the sick when we are well, our human condition should remind us how easily we too can become sick. In her powerful essay, Illness as Metaphor, Susan Sontag argues, illness is a night side of life, a more onerous citizenship. Everyone who is born holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and the kingdom of the sick. Although we all prefer to use the good passport, sooner or later each of us is obliged, at least for a spell, to identify ourselves as citizens of that other place. When we don't understand this, we risk seeing each other only partially, only seeing the affliction and not the human being. Musar teacher Alan Mornis refers to this as seeing someone with the eyes of judgment instead of the eyes of compassion. What appears before us when we look with eyes of judgment are that person's accumulated deeds and habits as they stand right now, which we judge from our own vantage point. When we transcend the boundaries of self, however, and draw closer so that we can feel within us the truth about other person's experience and see with eyes of compassion, we can see that person as they are now. But something else will be added to that picture. We will see more deeply to perceive the untainted soul that is that kernel of the being, the image of a divine that is reflected in ourselves as well. We are reminded of purity laws in our Torah portion, particularly after having given birth. Days are set aside for recovery and to help the individuals attain holiness. The image of the divine is reflected in us, and in those days that are set aside, we are nurtured and protected. We are given compassion to promote God's loving community and our role within it. The Hebrew word for compassion, rachamim, is connected with rechem, the word for womb. In both Judaism and Islam, this quality is associated with God. Harun Moghal, a scholar and commentator of Islam, wrote about this aspect of the divine. God is like a womb within which creation is created, out of which life is issued, from which we emerge, but always God is the ultimate boundary, the shield and shell around us. How can we cultivate this divine quality in ourselves? In Tazria, the person who is afflicted with leprosy must be sent beyond the boundary of the camp. But when we look with the eyes of compassion, we see that we are all subject to creation and to death. The resident with the chart, never imagining himself as a patient. The rabbi standing at a graveside, thinking she will live forever. The friend coming to comfort a friend on her divorce, reassuring herself of the stability of her own marriage. As much as we try to separate ourselves, we are all in this world together. The more we see that, the more we can cultivate compassion. The key to the value of rachamim is understanding that we are all connected. In Mornis's words, that the you and me are mingled in a oneness that transcends our perceptions of separate identities. The sole trait of compassion may be more accurately defined as the inner experience of touching another being so closely that you no longer perceive the other one as separate from you. Once we see and feel this connection, we no longer see the person's illness. We see them as we would want to be seen, as whole human beings. After all, we too might find ourselves in need of being seen in such a light. In Musar, we endeavor to emulate the priest who saw not merely the skin disease, but the whole person, striving for rachamim, for compassion, as among the most noble of the Jewish values. Taking this lesson to heart, we can imitate not only the priest, but God too. May we strive to have compassion when encountering and caring for the sick and those around us, making us all whole people in the end. Shabbat Shalom.